How much do you truly know about the person who brings you your morning tea? You see them every single day, year after year, their hands pouring the steaming water, their smile as they hand you the cup. You trust them, you love them, and yet, my dears, sometimes the people closest to us harbor the deepest, most unimaginable secrets. I spent 3 decades wondering why my hair fell out in clumps, why my hands trembled, why my mind grew foggy, my body weak, my spirit slowly drowning in an invisible current I couldn't name. I blamed stress. I blamed age. I blamed myself for being weak, for complaining, for not being a strong enough wife and mother. Little did I know that every sip of my evening tea, that sacred ritual of comfort, was slowly poisoning me. Looking back now, I see all the signs I missed. Or perhaps I didn't miss them at all. Perhaps I simply didn't want to see them, because seeing them would have meant acknowledging a betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it would shatter everything I believed about family, loyalty, and love. You know, sometimes we're willing to suffer in silence rather than face the truth that might destroy us. My name is Eleanor Margaret Westbrook. I'm 78 years old now, and this story happened in 1962, though the full truth of it didn't emerge until 1992. Before I continue with what happened to me, my dears, I want to ask you to please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me, and I hope that by sharing my story, someone out there finds the courage they need to ask the hard questions about their own lives. Now then, let me tell you about the life I built, the life I lost, and the woman I became because of it all. Millbrook was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. Nestled in the rolling hills of northern Vermont, it had one main street with a pharmacy, a post office, 2 churches, and Mrs. Henderson's general store, where we all gathered on Saturday mornings. The white steeple of Millbrook Community Church rose above the maple trees, like a guardian angel watching over us all. I married Robert Westbrook in June of 1960. He was handsome in that quiet, dependable way that small towns adore. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, kind brown eyes, and hands that knew how to fix anything. His father was the town banker, a respected man, and his mother, Constance, was known as one of the pillars of the church community. When Robert proposed with his grandmother's diamond on an autumn evening, kneeling under that very steeple, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. We moved into a colonial house on Birch Street, painted pale yellow with black shutters. It had a wraparound porch where I planted petunias and marigolds. Our first child, Thomas, arrived in 1961, a beautiful boy with his father's serious eyes. Then came Margaret in 1963, with my red hair and stubborn chin. Finally, little James arrived in 1965, our unexpected blessing. The one who made Robert's face light up like Christmas morning. Our life was what every woman in Millbrook envied. A husband who came home at 5 o'clock sharp. Children who did well in school. A house where the flowers bloomed and the shutters were always freshly painted. I joined the ladies' auxiliary at church. I baked for the county fair. My apple pie won a blue ribbon in 1968. I wore pearl necklaces and drove a blue Chevy station wagon. I was, in every measurable way, content. But Robert's mother, Constance, lived just 3 houses away. She was 65 when I married Robert, a widow of 7 years, with white hair set in permanent waves and a manner that could freeze a room at 20 paces. She had opinions about everything: how I kept house not well enough, how I raised my children too permissive, how I dressed too casual, and especially about how I treated her son never quite good enough. Yet despite her sharp tongue and critical eye, she was useful. That's the word I'm ashamed to use now, but it's the truth. When Thomas had pneumonia, she sat by his bedside. When I miscarried between Margaret and James, she brought casseroles and handled everything. She was always there, my dears, always watching, always present. And I thought how naive I was that it was out of love. The first strange thing happened in the spring of 1967. I'd bought a bottle of Chanel No. 5 a luxury. I could barely justify and kept it on my vanity. One morning, I noticed it was nearly empty. I assumed I was imagining things. Women don't just forget using perfume, but life was busy. Thomas was in school, Margaret was a toddler, and James was on the way. I bought another bottle, though I felt foolish. But then Robert mentioned seeing something peculiar. He came home from the bank one afternoon, looking unsettled. I thought I saw Mother at the Riverside Hotel on Thursday, he said, frowning, with another woman. But it must have been someone else. Mother doesn't go to the Riverside. The Riverside Hotel wasn't a place respectable ladies frequented. You understand, it catered to traveling salesmen and people passing through. Constance would never go there, or so I thought. Then there were the missing things. A cream-colored dress from my closeted dress I'd worn exactly twice. I asked Constance if she'd borrowed it. She borrowed things sometimes. She looked at me with those pale blue eyes and said, "Why would I borrow your dress, Eleanor? I have plenty of my own." But I could have sworn I'd seen that dress recently on someone. My mind was playing tricks. I told myself. The rules were the strange part, my dears. Constance insisted on making Robert's evening tea. This was unusual, because I did most of the cooking, but she was adamant. I know exactly how Robert likes it, she'd say, shooing me away from the kitchen. Earl Grey with exactly 2 sugars and a splash of cream. I've been making it for him since he was a boy. Let me do this small thing. Robert seemed uncomfortable with it, but he didn't want to hurt his mother's feelings. Then I noticed that Constance also made my tea. Every evening, right at 6 o'clock, she'd appear with 2 perfect cups on a wooden tray. For the ladies, she'd announce, handing one to me and keeping the other. Mine had a faint herbal taste chamomile. I assumed soothing, restful. I actually looked forward to it after a long day with the children. Around 1970, I started having strange symptoms. Nothing dramatic, just a persistent fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. My hair began falling out in alarming quantities. I'd find it in the shower drain, on my pillow, caught in my brush. By 1972, I was nearly bald in places, though I hid it under scarves and careful styling. A doctor in Montpelier ran tests. He couldn't find anything wrong with me. Sometimes women experience these things, he said, with that dismissive tone doctors use when they can't diagnose something. Perhaps you're anxious. Have you considered seeing a psychiatrist? I developed tremors in my hands. I'd be making dinner and nearly drop apart. My thinking became fuzzy. I'd lose my keys. Forget why I'd walked into a room. Call Margaret by Thomas's name. I grew thin. My wedding ring, which had fit perfectly for a decade, slipped around my finger like a bracelet. Constance watched all of this with what I now realize was satisfaction. You're not looking well, Eleanor, she'd say, squeezing my arm where the flesh had grown loose. You should see another doctor. You're wasting away. Poor Robert. He needs a healthy wife. The implication was always there. I was failing him, failing them. In 1975, I overheard Robert on the telephone with his superior at the bank. Yes, he was saying, my wife has been struggling with her health. We may need to make arrangements. But I never learned what arrangements he meant. When I asked him about it, he became evasive. Nothing important, dear, just work matters. The truth came to light on a cold November evening in 1992. I was 52 years old. My hair had grown back somewhat, though it remained thin and brittle. My hands shook constantly. I'd been told by 3 different doctors that I had early onset Parkinson's disease, though something never sat quite right with that diagnosis. Thomas, my oldest, had become a neurologist. He was home for Thanksgiving, and I'll never forget the moment he noticed something. We were having dinner. Constance wasn't there for once. She'd gone to visit her sister in Massachusetts, and Thomas was looking at me with that clinical eye he'd developed. Mom, he said slowly, setting down his fork. Your symptoms. When exactly did they start? Around 1970, I suppose, I said. Why, then grandmother lives nearby. She visits regularly. I felt a chill run through me, though I didn't know why. She lives 3 houses away. Why are you asking these questions? Thomas stood up. He was pale. I need to see your doctor's records. All of them. From 1970 onward. What followed was 2 weeks of investigation. Thomas reviewed my medical history. He consulted with his colleagues, and then he called me into his study, the room that had been his father's. Because, yes, Robert had died in 1988, leaving me a widow at 48. His heart, they said, he'd been so stressed. Mom, Thomas said, taking my trembling hand in his, I believe you've been poisoned. Not recently, not for the past few years, but systematically, for decades. Someone has been giving you heavy metals, arsenic, and lead, most likely. The symptoms match perfectly. The tremors, the hair loss, the cognitive decline, the weakness. It's not Parkinson's. It's toxic accumulation. I remember the room tilting. I remember my mouth moving, but no words coming out. Finally, I whispered, "Who?" "That's what we need to find out," he said quietly. It took 3 more weeks, and the help of Margaret, who'd become a lawyer, and James, who was working in accounting. We went through 30 years of household records. Constance had been with us almost daily. She made my tea. She took care of me when I was ill. And we found something in the files Robert kept. A receipt from an apothecary in Burlington, dated 1967, for medicinal compounds. Robert's name was on it, but we knew. We confronted Constance on a winter afternoon in 1992. Margaret and Thomas were there with me. We sat in her tiny living room, where doilies covered every surface, and photographs of Robert as a child lined the mantelpiece. "Why did you do it?" I asked her, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. Constance sat in her wingback chair, perfectly composed, and smiled. That smile, my dears, was the smile of someone watching a beloved toy break. "Because Robert was mine," she said simply. "And you were taking him away. You were distracting him from his duty to his family. You were filling his head with your pretty face and your modest talents, making him forget where he came from. You poisoned her," Margaret said, her voice cold as winter. "For 30 years, you slowly poisoned my mother. I gave her exactly what she needed to become what she was meant to be," Constance said. "A quiet woman, a grateful woman, a woman who would be dependent on her family, a woman who wouldn't expect too much from life." That's when Thomas stood up, and Margaret called the police. The investigation that followed was complicated. Constance had been careful, so careful, my dears. The apothecary had burned down in 1968. The record of the compound was vague. But Thomas's medical evidence was strong, and a toxicologist confirmed that the concentration of arsenic and lead in my body was consistent with long-term, deliberate exposure. In the end, Constance was charged with attempted murder. She was 77 years old. The trial was a sensation in Vermont. The local papers ran the story for weeks. The church ladies who once admired her condemned her. The town that had called her respectable now called her monster. She spent 3 years in jail before dying of a stroke in 1995. She never once expressed remorse. In her final letter to Robert, he was dead by then. But she didn't know she wrote, "I did what a mother must do. Someday, Robert will understand that I saved him from ruin." The discovery destroyed everything I thought was solid in my world. First came the shame. Oh, my dears, the shame was unbearable. People looked at me differently, not with pity that would have been easier to bear. They looked at me with a mixture of fascination and doubt. Had I really been poisoned? Or was I a hysterical woman making up stories? Some whispered that I'd done it myself, seeking attention. Others suggested that perhaps I was the one who'd poisoned Robert, and I was fabricating this elaborate lie to cover it up. The church, that place I'd served faithfully for 30 years, asked me to step down from the ladies' auxiliary. The pastor, a kind man named Reverend Williams, visited me personally to express his regret. But the decision had been made. My presence was difficult for the congregation. Too many painful memories. I lost my job as a part-time secretary at the school. The headmaster was apologetic but firm. Parents were uncomfortable with the poisoning situation. They feared it was somehow contagious, as if evil could be transmitted like the flu. The financial situation was dire. Robert had left me a modest insurance policy and a mortgage on a house. That was now a symbol of my humiliation. The medical bills from my treatments were astronomical. My children, bless them, wanted to help, but Thomas had his own family and practice. Margaret had just gotten married, and James was struggling in his own career. For the first time in my life, I was afraid, not of poison, but of poverty, of being alone, of being the woman in town whose mother-in-law tried to murder her. That became my identity. Not Eleanor the baker, not Eleanor the devoted mother, but Eleanor the poisoned woman. In January of 1993, I stood in my kitchen and made a decision. I could lie down and die slowly, the way Constance had tried to make me do, or I could live, truly live. I took everything I had left, my hand, my mind, my 30 years of housekeeping experience, and my sheer stubborn determination. First, I started washing clothes, not just the laundry of my own small household, but for other people. I posted a notice in the laundromat, "Fine clothing washing service, attention to details, reasonable rates, My hands, though they still trembled, remembered the proper way to treat fabrics, the delicate care that silk demanded, the precise water temperature for wool. I'd pick up garments on Monday, return them on Friday, pressed and folded with tissue paper between the layers, just so the money was meager at first. $10 here, 15 there, but it was honest work, and it was mine. Then I started making sweets. My apple pie had won that blue ribbon back in 1968. I'd never stopped making it. It was one of the few things that brought me comfort during those long decades of illness. I began baking pies, cookies, and my special fudge, which I learned to joke years later was definitely not poisoned. I'd sell them out of a small basket at the farmer's market in Montpelier, 30 minutes away. Those who remembered Eleanor the baker came back. They told their friends. By the summer of 1993, I couldn't bake fast enough to meet demand. The work was grueling, my dears. I'd wake at 4 in the morning and work until midnight. My hands became rough as tree bark, marked with burns from the oven and cuts from the grater. My back ached constantly. There were nights I'd cry myself to sleep, not from the physical pain, but from the realization of how far I'd fallen. I'd been a banker's wife, respected and comfortable. Now I was the poisoned woman, making pies in her basement to survive. I started tutoring neighborhood children in reading and mathematics. I did this quietly, almost secretly, working out of my home for families who paid me in cash. A single mother who worked at the diner paid me by giving me free meals. An elderly couple who'd won the lottery paid me handsomely, and their gratitude was written on their faces every session. Margaret helped me set up a small booth at the farmer's market. Thomas drove me there and helped me set up, though he tried not to show how much it pained him to see his mother in this situation. James handled my finances, setting aside the small profits, being careful and strategic about it. By 1994, I was operating 3 income streams: laundry service, baked goods, and tutoring. I was making enough to cover my mortgage, my utilities, and my meager food budget. I was also exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was a bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting for your survival every single day. My hands developed arthritis from the work. My shoulder became chronically inflamed. I had to wear orthopedic supports under my clothes. My left eye developed a twitch from the stress, but I kept working, because work was the only thing standing between me and complete destitution. Work was my defiance against Constance's final curse. There were small moments of grace. A man named George Chen, who owned the Montpelier Farmers Market, began to help me. He'd give me premium booth space at a reduced rate. He'd recommend my pies to other vendors. He'd sit with me when I looked too tired to go on. "You have a good product," he'd tell me. "You have a good story, not the poison story, but the survival story. People know it. People respect it." By 1995, we expanded. I rented a small commercial kitchen space in Montpelier. I hired a woman named Dorothy, who'd also fallen on hard times. Together, we made pies, cookies, and a line of preserves that we began selling to local shops. The Eleanor Westbrook Bakery, the label read, with a simple drawing of an apple. The turning point came on a Saturday in October 1995. I was at the farmer's market, as I was every Saturday, when a woman approached my booth. She was elderly, maybe older than I was, with gray hair and kind eyes. I recognized her, Margaret Thorne, the mayor's wife. She'd been one of the church ladies who'd condemned me, who'd looked at me with such disdain during the trial. I tensed, expecting cruelty. Instead, she picked up a pie. "I heard about you," she said quietly, "that you started this business, that you're supporting yourself, that you stood up in court and told the truth about what happened, even though it would have been easier to stay silent." I didn't know what to say. "My husband was very wrong," she continued, "and so was I. We believed what was easier to believe. We judged you when we should have marveled at your strength." She bought for pies. She handed me a card for the ladies' auxiliary at her church in Montpelier, a different church. "I think you should be here," she said. She turned and walked away. I stood there holding that card, my hands shaking, but not from poison or fear, from something else entirely, from the first hint, perhaps, that the world might not be entirely against me. That event changed everything, though I didn't know it yet. Margaret Thorne told her friends about the brave woman at the farmer's market. Word spread. By December, I had 2 shops in Montpelier asking to carry my baked goods on consignment. By spring 1996, I had 5 locations. By 1997, 8. The women's group at Margaret Thorne's church invited me to speak. I was terrified, but I did it. I stood in front of 40 women and told my story. I saw tears. I saw anger. I saw admiration. And when I finished, they stood and applauded. Some came to me afterward and embraced me. Others bought my products. Several became dear friends. The local newspaper did a feature on me in 1998, from poisoning victim to business owner. Eleanor Westbrook's remarkable journey. Suddenly, I wasn't just the poisoned woman. I was the woman who'd survived, who'd fought back, who'd built something of her own. By 2000, I had expanded Eleanor Westbrook Bakery into a small storefront in downtown Montpelier. It had a cafe where customers could sit and eat fresh pie with coffee. I employed 5 people. My products were sold in 15 shops across Vermont, Thomas became a renowned neurologist. His research on toxic exposure helped numerous other patients. He wrote a book, and in the acknowledgments, he thanked me for my strength. Margaret became a partner at her law firm and specialized in elder abuse cases. My case informed her passion for protecting vulnerable people. James became the controller at a major regional company, and he volunteered his accounting expertise to nonprofits helping abuse survivors. I saw grandchildren arrive for beautiful grandsons and 3 granddaughters. I held them in my arms, and I wept, not from pain, but from gratitude that I'd lived long enough to see them. I taught them to bake. I told them stories, not the poison stories, but stories about resilience, about getting back up when life knocked you down. In 2003, I received a Community Service Award from the state of Vermont. The governor presented it to me at a ceremony in Montpelier. I wore a dress I'd made myself, coral-colored, elegant, nothing like the frightened woman I'd been. On the stage, with my 3 children beside me, I accepted the award. In the audience, I saw some of the church ladies who'd abandoned me. They were clapping now. Constance died in 1995, alone in her hospital room, 40 pounds overweight and bitter to the end. My Robert had preceded her by 7 years, and I'd been told by his doctor that stress had likely contributed to his early death. He'd known, I believe, or at least suspected, what his mother was doing, and his weakness in protecting me had cost him his life. I often wondered if that was her final triumph, that even from beyond the grave, her poison had taken him from me. But I chose not to let that belief live in my heart. I chose to remember the good years, the kind moments, the way he'd held my hand when James was born. In 2008, I sold the bakery to Dorothy and the team I'd built. The business thrived. My products are still sold in Vermont shops today. You can find Eleanor Westbrook bakery goods in 18 locations across the state. But I wanted to step back, to rest, to enjoy the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Looking back now, from the vantage point of 78 years, I've thought a great deal about what Constance tried to do to me. She tried to destroy me with her poison, with her manipulation, with her twisted need to control her son. And for a long time, she succeeded. I spent 3 decades slowly dying, wondering why my body betrayed me, why my mind couldn't stay sharp, why I was failing at everything. But here's what I learned, my dears, and this is the most important thing I want to leave with you. You are stronger than you know. You are more resilient than you can imagine. The things that try to destroy us, whether they're literal poison or the metaphorical poison of cruelty, neglect, and manipulation, they cannot win unless we let them. I could have given up after Constance was arrested. I could have let my children support me. I could have retreated from the world and let shame consume me. Instead, I chose to fight. I chose to work. I chose to build something new that my children are proud. My grandchildren know my story not as a victim's tale, but as a story of triumph. My business legacy continues, and more importantly, my friendship with Dorothy, my bond with George Chen, my reconciliation with Margaret Thornlees are the real treasures I built out of the ashes of my old life. The poison took years from me. It took my hair, my health, my sense of security, but it couldn't take my determination. It couldn't take my will to live. It couldn't take my hands' knowledge of how to create something beautiful and nourishing. To anyone listening who's been poisoned not literally, but by betrayal, by abuse, by the cruelty of those who should have loved you, I want you to know you are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by how you rise up, by the dignity you reclaim, by the new life you build. Thank you for listening to me today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share this with someone who might be needing a little hope. And please, leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I'm Eleanor Margaret Westbrook, and this is my story. This is my truth, and I live to tell it. God bless you, my dears.